I'm Stephanie Saad. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio team.
I'm Ken Hardy. I'm also a program manager on the Visual Studio team.
The new extensibility features in Visual Studio are features that we think are some of the most exciting of everything we're releasing in Visual Studio 2005. Ken's going to talk to you some about what his team's been building and what are the features we're most excited about delivering to customers. So, Ken, I thought we could start off by talking about what it is that users can now customize inside the shell. So can you explain some of the new extensibility features that you can do? So let's say I'm a user and I'm working inside Visual Studio. What can I do with the shell to customize it to my use?
There's actually a lot of extensibility, even just for an end user. Obviously, there's the visual customization that you all know and love inside the IDE. But using just macros, you can start by recording some key presses, but then you can actually go and write real code in there and take advantage of all the various features of the IDE, including the task list, the solution and project system. And you can add your own commands to rerun those commands after you've finished them.
Really? So let's say I wanted to add in a new command into the shell. That's something that I could do?
Sure, you could bind a command to spell check your comments or collapse all your code into, so that you only have to see the function headers.
Oh,
you
really?
can do all kinds of great things with macros and commands.
So I could add in some macro that would say add in line numbers. That's something that always drives me crazy. Never have line numbers.
I think you could probably do that, yeah.
That'd be cool. What about windows? Is that something I could add in?
Yeah, now you can't actually create macros or windows with a macro, but you can actually create what we call an add-in, which is a piece of program code that basically becomes part of the Visual Studio feature set.
Yeah.
And you can add any number of features, and this is available to all people who have a copy of Visual Studio.
Huh.
And you can add a window that basically hosts any control of your choice. So you could implement a window that has some kind of chart in it, or you could add your own help content, or any sort of thing you could come up with that you would want to put inside a window in the shell.
How hard is it to develop an add-in?
It's actually fairly straightforward. We have a wizard, or you run the wizard and it gives you a few choices, like do you want to have a toolbar button to kick your window off? Do you want to have it start up every time you start Visual Studio? You go through like 5 steps and you have code that will run inside the IDE.
And I probably have to do that in C++ or some... There's no way I can do that in managed language.
You can do it in any language you want.
Really?
C++ is supported, but we also have support for managed languages like VB and C#. And WIDBE will also have support for managed C++ code as well as J#.
So let me ask, would it be possible then for me to go inside the IDE, create an add-in, and then say F5 it and run it inside the IDE and actually see it run?
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. It debugs right in the Visual Studio environment using the standard tools that you know and love, and you can test it inside the IDE as well.
What other really cool features do you think exist in the extensibility infrastructure?
So a thing that we haven't touched on yet is that it's actually possible to do anything in the IDE that a Microsoft product has done in it through extensibility. We've talked a little bit about macros and add-ins, which are things that we have built into the product as an end user feature. But we actually have a full SDK for Visual Studio, which we have called in the past the Visual Studio Integration Partner SDK, or the VSIP SDK, which basically gives you access to the same exact interfaces that we use to plug our products into the shell. So Visual Basic implemented using these interfaces, and C# implemented these interfaces for their product, and the new Team System integrates using these same interfaces. They're available to anyone free on our website.
So we've talked about users, things that users can create in Visual Studio, which are macros and add-ins, which are very easy to create. What about industry partners like Fujitsu Cobol or Oracle? Can you explain how they might be able to plug into the Visual Studio shell?
Right, so they would get the SDK that we just talked about, and essentially they can then use that to implement a new language like Fujitsu, or we actually have implementations of most languages you've ever heard of: Perl, RPG, Fortran. So they can implement a language, or they could implement some kind of tool. Like we have lots of testing tools. We have bug tracking systems, source control systems. Any product you can imagine has been implemented by a VSIP partner. We have around 200 companies that participate in the program, and over 400 products that were built to integrate into the Visual Studio environment and add functionality.
So you're saying I could go in, I'll launch up Visual Studio, and it won't actually be C# or VB. it'll be Fujitsu Cobalt, but all the tools around it are exactly the same. Everything that I'm used to about working with a shell.
Yeah, you have
just a different
the same
language.
project system, the same editor with IntelliSense and syntax coloring, the task list, the toolbox. It's all there, and it can be leveraged by these partner products as well as by Visual Studio products.
So I can go out and write my own language, plug it into the shell, and have complete access to everything that Visual Basic has today.
You could.
That is fantastic. What are some of the core partners that we have in the VSIC program?
So you mentioned a couple of them already. Fujitsu has been building some great implementations of COBOL that allow legacy code to be brought forward. Oracle is a key new one. We also have IBM DB2 that provides some great database tools so that you can still use those great Visual Studio tools that you love to develop on databases that your customers probably have, like DB2 or Oracle. We also have a ton of products out there that are there to round out the lifecycle tools, like modeling products like Borland's Together or Rational's XDE. There's a lot of products in that space, including bug tracking and source control, and we have partner products that do all of them. So if you look down the list, we have a lot of big names. We have Borland and CompuWare and Rational, and Oracle's just one of the latest ones to sign up.
That is really cool. It's all stuff we're super excited about.
It's great.
It'd be great to show a demo of that.
Yeah, we can show a demo now.
We should cut and show a demo.
First, I'd like to show you how easy it is to customize the Visual Studio IDE by using a macro. If you look at this project I'm working on, I've got some C# code in the editor window, but the font is awfully small. This, is easy to change using Tools Options, but you have to go through quite a few steps to accomplish that simple task. We're able to accomplish the same task through just a couple of lines of code in a macro. So if you look over in this right-hand macro explorer I've got some macros in here to do things with the font size. And I can just simply double-click this macro, and you'll notice the font size in the editor gets bigger. Now, I'm able to do this programmatically by just having a variable that says how many points in font size to raise it, and it gets bigger and bigger as I go along. Let's go ahead and show the code that we've written to make this happen. And you'll see that it's actually quite easy to accomplish. Here is my increase text editor font size macro, and I have two lines of code. The first line gets the property of the fonts and colors settings in the text editor, and the second line essentially takes that value and raises it by our defined increment variable. Now, if you wanted to make the size lower, it's almost just as easy. We do the same exact operation in reverse, except we set a minimum supported size to check to make sure that we don't reduce the font to be too small. Now, this macro is really useful and powerful, as I've shown, but you can actually bind it to a keyboard combination to make it even easier. We can easily bind our macros to a key binding by going into the Tools Options dialog and picking the keyboard option page, and then pick our commands, and all macros are automatically bound to commands in the IDE. So you'll see that I've already found my accessibility macros in this dialog. So to give it an easy key press, like say Control-Alt-Up, I would select the macro I want to do, click in the shortcut keys box. Actually, I need to select the scope first, so I'm going to do this only in the text editor, and then I'm going to press Control-Alt and Up to set that to be my key binding. Now make sure you click Assign to pick the one that you want. Control-Alt down would be better for decrease. And then to increase my font size, I would repeat the same steps by selecting the increase size, selecting the text editor, and pressing Control-Alt and Up, and making sure I click the button to assign the key. So now we go back into the IDE, and you can see the Macro Explorer is open, but I don't need to use it any longer. If I put the cursor into the text editor and press Control-Alt down, I can easily reduce the font by the defined increment. And of course, Control-Alt-Up will take it back to some place where I can see it again. So that's how easy it is to do some simple code that will make your IDE more useful and powerful for you. But I also want to take a minute and show you how much the extensibility model will let you do inside the Visual Studio IDE. In this case, we've actually created an incredibly sophisticated language which we call figures. Essentially what this language does is let you visually design some shapes onto a form, and then we'll create some code for it. So you'll notice that in my new project dialog, I actually have a new folder for figures projects and a new project system for figures projects. And so I can actually create a new project for figures, and it will load into my IDE just like it was a C# or a VB project. It'll take just a second to create our initial instance of the project. And you'll see that it comes up in Solution Explorer with its own little icon and some files that we've pre-configured. And we'll talk for a second in a moment about why there's some C# code files in there. But essentially I've got this new type of project that I've added to Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do with this project by adding a new item. You'll see that for my figures project I have a figure file, and this figure file will allow me to create a shape form in my shapes designer. So I'll make a file called shapes.fig, and it will load my new designer into Visual Studio. Now it doesn't look quite as nice as the Visual Studio form designer, but I can prove that it is actually a visual designer. First I can use drag and drop to move things around in the form. And the true sign of all visual things is that I can use the toolbox to drop new items onto my form. And then finally I can also use the property window to set the properties of the different objects that I have. So I could give this rectangle a name, and I could set its various parameters by changing properties in the property browser. We've also integrated this window, which we call the figure outline window, that allows us to have a different view of our data, where here we've sorted it by the specific types of shapes, and we've added those into this window so that you could easily navigate to them. Another really great thing about our project is it actually is a real designer with a real set of code behind it. So just like if I was editing VB, I can go to the solution and I can say view code on my figures project, and now you'll see that I have an editor showing the code that maps to my figure file. I'm going to go ahead and show you these together so that you can see that there really is a mapping between the code in my editor window and the designer in my designer window. So here I've got the code that I've been working on, and I have a definition for an arrow, and I'll just go ahead and add a name to the arrow, which we do by adding a comment to the end. You'll see that the color is green, meaning that it's a comment, and you'll also notice that the name has been added above. But in addition to just syntax coloring, we also have all of the other great IntelliSense features that you might expect. So since our language is so sophisticated, we only have one reserved word called draw. So if I try to scribble something, you'll notice that we've underlined it and told you that scribble is an invalid token in our language. So I can go ahead and do a draw operation though and get statement completion to help me pick an object. So we'll draw a circle. And then I also get method tips to tell me what the parameters are for the function that I'm executing. And you'll notice that all the things that I've just done have been added to my designer above. The final thing that we've done is fully integrated this into Visual Studio's build system. So if I save my file and hit run, what will happen is we'll do a compile operation on our project. Now this is a special kind of project. Since this language is so sophisticated, we don't actually compile it down to .NET Intermediate language. What we do instead is we convert it into C#. So our build operation actually has two steps. Step one is to turn it into C# code, which were those generated files you saw in the project to begin with. And step two is to compile and execute the C# code and run it on the .NET framework. Eventually this form will come up and you can see that we actually have a set of shapes on a Windows form, and see that we have actually added a complete language with a full set of features into the Visual Studio IDE. This is all possible through the VSIP SDK that we've been talking about.
I hope that gave you a good idea of some of the things you could do with the Visual Studio extensibility system.
Yeah, we're really excited. The core features around extensibility, users being able to use macros inside the IDE to record and play back what they've already done, create add-ins so you can have your own commands, your own windows, add in and customize the shell as a user, And then finally, as an industry partner, to extend the shell and create your own version of the IDE with even something as complex as your own language. It's really exciting and compelling new features that we have in Visual Studio 2005.